I have now finished A Gentleman in Moscow, so I'll try to give some of my thoughts on this. This was a book we did for book club at work. We've recently started up a book club at work, and one of the positives of book club, or maybe one of the positives and the negatives of book club, is that you end up reading books that you have never heard of before and otherwise would never have sought out before. So this was somebody else's choice. I had my own recommendations, but book club didn't choose any of my recommendations, so we went with somebody else's. And I had never heard of it before. This book came out in 2016, so I guess it's been out for a few years. I've just been oblivious to it. And I don't know if you can see here on this sticker, it says soon to be a major television series. Actually, this is a little bit out of date now because I think the television series has already premiered. According to Wikipedia, in March of 2024, so this year, a mini-series based on this book was premiered on Paramount Plus. I've never heard of the mini-series beforehand. I've never seen it, but it is. I guess this book is relatively famous. And it did get very good reviews. I mean, this is one of those books where the first few pages is just filled with excerpts from rave reviews. And I know you can never trust these things put out by the publisher. But if you Google it, there are a lot of very good reviews of this book as well. I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I didn't quite see what all the fuss was about. And whenever I give a critical review of a book that's been so highly praised, I'm always nervous that I'm missing something, or that the something in this book that connected with a lot of people just didn't connect with me. There's a possibility I'm gonna make a fool out of myself by giving a review which indicates I've obviously missed something about this book. On the other hand, the positive part about that is through the comments that people leave on this channel, pointing out what I missed in the book or pointing out why I'm an idiot, I like to think I grow as a reader a little bit. So by all means, leave those comments. Tell me what I missed. Tell me why I didn't get it. It helps me to grow. This book. Part of, I think, my problems with this book was just maybe part of mixed expectations. So the guy in our book club who wanted to read this book wanted to read it because it was supposed to be a historical novel. And some of the people in book club had been talking about how they wanted to read a historical novel. So this is the background to this book. Maybe I should start here. The plot is that there's an aristocrat who's under house arrest in a hotel in Moscow, starting off in 1922, so right after the end of the Russian Revolution. And he stays under house arrest in this hotel through the decades, through the 1920s, through the 1930s, through the 1940s, and into the 1950s. As such, he's kind of an observer of the changes in Russian society happening around him. That's how this book was sold to us at our book club. And there is an element of that, but as you read this book, you discover that the book is not so much interested in the history. The history is there. It's kind of peeking around the corners. There are references made to it here and there. Some of the changes in Russian society and the famine and the Great Purge and stuff like that is all there. It's in the background. But that's not the main focus of the book. The book is just about life in the hotel. Now, while I was reading this book, I made a point of trying to not read anything about it till I was done, just to avoid spoilers. Partly because I had this idea that the plot of this book was going to be more intricate than it actually was. The plot is actually fairly simple, as it turns out. But I didn't know that. I thought it was going to be one of those intricate plots, and I didn't want to spoil anything for me, so I didn't seek out anything. I didn't read anything about it until after I had finished it. But after I had finished it, spoilers, I went to the Wikipedia page, and it turns out the author of this book, Amor, Towles, was interested in a couple of different things. He was interested, he had been traveling around Europe, and he had noticed that a lot of these grand hotels had kind of permanent residents or semi-permanent residents who would stay for extended stays in the hotels. So he was interested in what the life of somebody who was like, who was living in a hotel, like a resident. Now, the hotel where the Count is sentenced to life imprisonment is the Metropole Hotel, which is a real place in Moscow. And I guess the author had visited that place and was intrigued by it. And this is also combined with his knowledge that it was apparently common in the Soviet era to sentence people to house arrest, or I guess common in Russian history to sentence people to house arrest. So he got the idea, what if somebody was sentenced to a house arrest in a grand hotel? And once I read on Wikipedia that was the inspiration for the book, it kind of clicked a little bit. I mean, I had largely figured this out beforehand, but it was just confirmation that, okay, so we're not really so much interested in the Russian history that's happening. We're interested in what it would just be like to be imprisoned in this grand hotel. And that's the conceit of the novel. It's historical fiction to a certain extent. We get glimpses of the history, but that's really the preoccupation of the novel. It's what the storyline is exploring. Okay, so to back up a little bit maybe and give some of the plot, and I will get into spoilers here, so if you were like I was and you want to avoid any spoilers before reading this book, turn it off now. But the book starts off in 1922 with a court transcript, which is given the court proceedings, which are going to explain why Count Rostov is sentenced to house arrest in the hotel. So it's 1922. Count Rostov has come back to Russia after having been living abroad in Europe. And he is both admired and despised by the Bolsheviks. He's despised because he's their class enemy. He's an aristocrat who has gone abroad and is an unrepentant aristocrat. He brags about his membership at the Jockey Club and how he's a gentleman. At the same time, though, he has written a poem back in 1913. 1913, and I actually know this because I've been listening to Mike Duncan's podcast on the history of the Russian Revolution. The 1913 period was a period of repression after the failed revolution of 1905. Again, this is where my historical knowledge from Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcasts helps me out a little bit. So to have, in that climate, have written a poem which is celebrating the spirit of revolution has made him somebody that some members of the Bolsheviks regard as a hero of the revolution. The opening pages here, when he's having the dialogue, the back and forth in the court hearing, is well done. There's some snappy dialogue here. It's interesting. There's some political intrigue. There's some courtroom intrigue. I mean, it only goes on for a couple pages, but it made me think, okay, this is going to be an interesting book. It wasn't my pick for book club, but I'm glad we went with it. Looks like there's going to be some interesting things happening. But the pace of the book slows down immediately once we get to the first chapter. So the courtroom transcripts are just the prologue. And then there's not much of a forward-moving plot. It's just the story of how the Count is adjusting to his life as a prisoner in the hotel, somebody who's been sentenced to house arrest in the hotel. So the Count is used to freedom of movement around the city with all the, idleness of a gentleman at leisure, picking up his coffee here, seeing the ballet there, going to the tailor's here. And he's used to a very wide circle. And now he's confined to the hotel. On the other hand, though, this is a very luxurious hotel. It's got like the finest restaurants in Moscow. The Count has smuggled some money in with him, some gold coins, so he is never financially hurting throughout the whole of this novel. He's able to enjoy all the luxuries of the hotel. So it's both a punishment, but it's kind of an odd punishment. He's sentenced to live a life of luxury in this hotel. It's just a very confined space that he's in. He can't leave the hotel. So he's battling boredom, but it's a very luxurious boredom. It describes the luxurious lunches he has and all the high-priced alcohol he's drinking, and they move him into a much smaller room. The Bolsheviks do in the first chapter, but that's the limit of his privations. Aside from that, he's got. Aside from being in a smaller room, he's got the full run of the hotel that everyone else has. Somebody at my book club, now we actually haven't met up to discuss this as a book club yet. I just finished this yesterday. But we've been chatting a little bit about it informally at work. Somebody at my book club thought it was a novel about stoicism. So handling the misfortunes that life has sent you in a very stoical way. And there's a bit of that, especially at the beginning. So it talks about, I believe it's his grandmother, if I'm remembering rightly, who was the matriarch of the family and was presiding over this big mansion that they had, and who lost everything when the Bolsheviks came to power. Her mansion got burned down. She had to escape to Europe. But she reiterated to the Count a lesson he had learned in childhood about how, losing can be very painful, but don't lose your temper. Don't throw a temper tantrum. This was a lesson that the Count had learned as a young boy, because it only gives your opponents the satisfaction. And so the Count is very much of that mindset. It's very kind of, he's not British, obviously, he's Russian, but it is kind of like a British stiff upper lip mentality. Never let them see you're upset. Just take whatever they throw at you in stride and keep a stiff upper lip. I don't know much about the Russian upper classes, I guess, other than what I've read in War and Peace, which, by the way, is a novel that gets referenced several times in this book. But anyways, don't know much about the Russian upper classes, but if you think of the British upper classes as like a model for the Count's attitude, it's pretty much that same idea. So that's the central idea behind this novel. Oh, sorry. Let me just finish up what I was saying about Stoicism. That was one of the members of the book club. That was his early impression of this book. And there is an element of that in there. I don't think, having finished the whole thing now, I don't think that's actually the major theme that comes through from the whole book, but there was an element of that in the beginning. Now, of course, when you consider the absolute horrors that were happening in the Soviet Union during this period of the 1930s and the 1940s, then the sufferings that the Count was going through absolutely pale in comparison. And it's an interesting choice of a setting. When these horrors, the famine in the Ukraine and the Stalinist purges and the privations and horrors of the battle in World War II, when you consider that all of that is happening in the background, it does make the choice of the Grand Hotel as a setting for this an interesting choice. Maybe not the best choice for a novel if you were wanting to emphasize stoicism. Being able to keep an optimistic attitude, or to keep maybe an unflinching attitude in spite of what life throws at you. I'm not sure I would agree that it's about stoicism. The Count has a luxurious existence, all things considered, throughout this very bad period in Russian history. And I don't know how accurate this book is. I guess I have to take it on faith that it's more or less accurate. It's a fictional story, but the historical setting is more or less accurate. Because apparently the author is well versed in his Russian history. But throughout everything that happens, the hotel remains a luxurious place. Now, there are times when the kitchen has trouble getting the exact ingredients, but nobody in the hotel ever goes hungry. There's always a lot of food to be had and expensive alcohol to be drunk in the hotel. So even though the aristocracy has been overthrown by the revolution, there's a new ruling class that's come in now, the communist ruling party, and they make use of the hotel as well as whatever people from the old days still happen to have money left. And so all throughout this period, the hotel remains a luxurious place, even during the famine in Russia and the famine in the Ukraine and the rest of it. So I guess that's accurate. I don't know. There's not really much of a plot in the book. There are plot threads which come and go a little bit, and there are developments. But it's basically just the Count making his life in these circumstances. The last book we read for the book club was Clara in the Sun, which had a number of hooks in it. And I realize that for anyone else who hasn't recently read Clara in the Sun, this comparison is maybe not helpful. But I mentioned that just because that was our last experience in book club, where there's a book that had a number of hooks in it, where once you got to a certain point, you just had to keep reading to find out what was going to happen next. This was not that book. It was pleasant to read, but there weren't quite the narrative hooks in it. And as I was chatting about it again with somebody at work from book club, and I said, if you compare it to Clara in the Sun, at a certain point I just couldn't put it down. I said this book is quite easy to put down. I mean, it's quite easy to pick up. It's well written, so it's quite easy to pick it up and read a few pages. But equally as well, it's equally easy to just not pick it up for a while and not read a few pages. I didn't feel as hooked by it. There are a number of developments that happen, some of which have payoffs later in the book, and some of them don't. There are things that just happen seemingly just for the sake of things happening. Now, this book has apparently been praised for being a comic masterpiece, a sheer delight. That apparently was the words from the Daily Express. I haven't actually read this full review. I'm just going off the blurb at the back page, but I felt that was overstating things a little bit. I didn't think it was a comic masterpiece per se, but there was definitely a comic tone to it, and there were definitely scenes that got a little bit of a smile out of me. There was a lot of humor all throughout this book. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a comic masterpiece, but it was nice to read. There were some fun scenes in it. I don't want to give any hard spoilers about the ending. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I might. We'll see where my mouth leads me before I get to the end of this review. But there is at the end, when we get to maybe the climax of this book and the resolution of it, I think we have come to care about these characters a bit, and it's a book that's a little bit on the longer end, 462 pages. So we do spend a lot of time with these characters. We get to know them, and then when there's the emotional payoff at the end, I think it does work to a certain degree. Except, I'm not sure how fully three-dimensional these characters are. The Count's daughter, or his adopted daughter, she didn't seem to me like a real person. She was just kind of painted as precocious and a little bit quirky, maybe, and not like a well-rounded character, a fully rounded character. Certainly, the antagonist in this story, the bishop, as he's known as, which is a clueless waiter who, because of his connections with the Communist Party, eventually rises through the ranks to become the hotel's manager, and is portrayed throughout as completely arrogant and completely inept. He was not a fully three-dimensional character. He was very much one of those characters who's only in the book so you can hate him. And, to be fair, the author does make a very good job of making him hateable, and you do fully resent him. But it's not completely fair, because his only purpose in the book is to be hated or resented. He's not like a full character. The other Count's friends are side characters. I'm not sure there was anyone who fully came across in this book as a complete three-dimensional human being, and for that reason, maybe my emotional involvement in the ending was limited. I was emotionally involved somewhat. The Count himself maybe is the fullest we get to a three-dimensional character. But even the Count himself is almost a little bit maybe of a caricature of an aristocrat, or a caricature of a gentleman. Yeah, what else to say about this? There are some interesting developments along the way. The character of what's her name, Nina, the young girl that the Count befriends at the beginning of the story, and I guess here I am getting into some spoilers. You expect her to figure more prominently in the book, and she does to a certain extent, because she ends up showing up one day and just dropping her daughter off with the Count, and then she just disappears from the story and is never heard from again. To a certain extent, I guess that's realistic, because this is a period in Russian history when people were just disappearing. But narratively, in terms of reader expectations, it's, well, I don't know. It's an interesting choice, having spent all this time watching her grow up and developing an affection for her as a reader, to have her just disappear, and now it's her daughter that we're going to watch grow up. Well, it was a bold choice by the author. There's some interesting winking that the author is doing at the audience through some of the footnotes in here, kind of breaking fourth wall humor, I guess, as it were, which was interesting, cleverly done, humorous. There's some historical name dropping that occurs a little bit in this book, maybe in the middle section, where historical figures are name dropped but never really explained. And I got to think that the author knows that we have access to Wikipedia, and that's why he's able to get away with name dropping things and not explaining them, because he knows. I mean, there's nothing that's really essential to the plot. It's just historical details that are name dropped. And if you're curious, you can go to Wikipedia to look them up. And if you don't care, you can just keep reading, and it doesn't really affect the story. But it struck me as a sign that that this is a book written in the Wikipedia age, and maybe more and more books are doing that nowadays. They don't need to have the footnotes. They know that you've got Wikipedia at your fingertips. I don't know. It's maybe an interesting sign of the times for the way books are written now. There's more to say about this book, but I'm just about at the limit of my time. Now that I've switched cameras, I'm back. I'm back once again to a 30-minute time limit before this camera is going to shut off. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I've said most of what I want to say about this book. So I give it a cautious recommend, would be the takeaway. And by all means, let me know what I missed.